Thanks, Mike, for the invitation to be here. I feel really honored to be with the presenters today. It's been a pleasure listening to you all, and I'm sure the afternoon will also be fabulous. The first thing I want to say is, how many of you have supervised arts-based research? Okay, so some. I'm really curious to hear from you maybe this afternoon about whether these ideas that I've come up with resonate with you at all, because this is sort of my first attempt at articulating what it's like to supervise arts-based research, and I kind of fell into this without knowing what I was doing. I was teaching a class at Lesley University. I think I started there the year you took us, went to Endicott. So we didn't cross paths quite that early, and I wasn't really familiar with all of Sean's writing. This has been about 21 years ago. And I had a student come into my thesis class and say, well, I'm struggling. I'm a music therapist, and I don't really know if I believe in music therapy. I believe in music and I believe in therapy, but I'm not sure that those things actually go together. So I really want to explore that in my thesis. And we had a conversation. I don't remember all the details, but the idea was born that this person would write a play, and the play would have two characters, music and therapy. And she then started to give them attributes and characters, and she developed them. And then she ended up writing 3 different endings to the play. One where they were married to start. They were having a rocky time. In one ending they divorce. In another ending they stay married. And in another ending they stay together sort of, but it's not really a great relationship. And I kind of went with it, and I was like, well, this is really cool. This is absolutely a cool way to write a thesis. That's really interesting. And it was only later that I went, oh, that was arts-based research that I was doing, that she was doing. Check that out, check that out. So I was really excited to do it. And I learned a lot, and I still do. I think I learn more from my students than any place else. It's the journey that teaches you. And each journey is really different. What I'm going to talk today about are 4 kind of themes that I've noticed in my practice of supervising arts-based research. And those are decentering traditional ways of knowing, the intelligence of artistic inquiry, when to trust the process and when to challenge the process, and the idea of evocative and robust results. So let's start with the first one. So in this world we live in, there's all kinds of privilege, some of which we talk about, some of which we don't. We talk about, or I hope we talk about white privilege, I hope we talk about straight privilege and things like that, but there's also this idea of privileging certain kinds of data, privileging certain ways of thinking. And so the first thing that I try to do when I'm supervising is get the student to step out of that and to look at what am I privileging as I look at this, because we're usually not privileging the arts. We're usually privileging linear thinking, organizational thinking, those kinds of things. And so I borrow this term from phenomenology. Sorry, Sean, I know you don't like labels, but the idea of horizontalization, where you take everything and equalize it so that nothing is carrying privilege. And then you can begin to play with it a little bit and say, okay, well, I tend to do this kind of privileging of data, but now I'm going to do this kind. I'm going to privilege a different kind of data at this point. So when I'm working with students around that, I'm getting them sort of to think not so much in their linear heads, but to begin to think in a different and creative and intuitive way. One of the first things that comes up for them as often is this legitimate? Is this legitimate? Am I going to be able to, I was talking to somebody earlier, Haley, yeah, am I going to be able to get a job if I write a dissertation in arts-based research? And so that's actually a big deal. And so I try to reassure students, yes, we do need people on the cutting edge. The problem about being on the cutting edge is that sometimes you bleed. And what I like to prepare my students is to have 2 things. To have one, a way of discussing it with people who are not artists necessarily, and try to explain it that way, as well as the way of explaining it through the arts. So I try to provide both. To Beth's question from this morning about how to evaluate arts-based research, I think there are some guidelines to go by. I love the way Ken Bruscia wrote in 1998 about standards of integrity. And he wrote about personal integrity, methodological integrity, interpersonal integrity, and aesthetic integrity. And I think this is not a checklist of saying, oh yeah, I've got that, I've got that, I've got that. It's just sort of a way of thinking about how am I going to evaluate, how am I going to think about this. And I think that helps as you're going through the process, because there's oftentimes where I feel off-center myself and I feel like I'm as lost as the student might be, and I'm not sure where we are. And so at that point, I always like to step back and go back to these levels of integrity and look at them and think, okay, well, all right, so we're in the process. It's a messy process, it's a muddy process, but we're in it and we're doing what we need to be doing. You can also look at the work of Barone and Eisner, who talk about concision, being concise. Sean mentioned this earlier, less is more, really honing it down so that it's not a lot and lot and lot of words or art or pictures or whatever, but to really to bring it down. Coherence, it has to make sense. As Sean also said, it has to be convincing. Generativity, social significance, it's got to mean something. And you've got to come away from it with some kind of deeper understanding. That to me is really the bottom line in evaluation, is if my understanding of the topic being studied has been increased, then I consider that good research. If I get to the end of it and I'm confused and lost and I don't really feel like I've learned anything new, that to me is a sign that that really wasn't robust research. So really framing it that way. And again, these are not checklists. These are just things to think about as you're looking. So let's talk for a minute about the intelligence of artistic inquiry. The thing that I love about it most is that it holds multiple perspectives. It really embraces what you thought couldn't be embraced. I had the pleasure of working with a doctoral student a number of years ago, Tammy Einstein from Israel, and she, in her process in the doctoral program, had made a coat, and this coat had symbols. She lives in Jerusalem, which is, as you know, a very conflicted area, a lot of different people in that area, a lot of warring populations in that area. So she made a coat, and on the coat she had the Israeli flag, and she had the Palestinian flag, and she had a gay pride flag, and she had all these other elements of the cultures of Jerusalem. So she brought all these really factions of things together. So here's this art piece that's embracing these very diverse and warring groups, and it was fabulous. Then what she did is she had people put it on and talk about what it was like to wear the coat. I got a chance to put on the coat, and it was a fascinating experience. I have a lot of connection to the Middle East myself, and so it was just a really intense moment to wear it. And oftentimes people would put this coat on and break into tears because it was so powerful. Some of the people who she photographed wearing the coat wouldn't put on the sleeve that had the Palestinian flag, or some wouldn't put on the Israeli flag, and some people had to cover up the gay pride flag because they didn't want to be seen in a coat with a gay pride flag on it. So but it's holding, this one artifact is holding all these multiple perspectives, and it's just a powerful way. You're not limited to one answer. In fact, you're not trying to find the one truth, you're trying to find a truth. You're trying to find one understanding. The other thing about the intelligence of artistic inquiry is, well, the emotional response, which I was just referring to, but also this idea that you have to embrace flexibility. You have to be flexible. You have to embrace ambiguity. That's one of the hardest things, I think, for me, because I'm a very straightforward thinker. It's really, I resonate with you, Sean, when you talk about your earlier life being so quantitative. I could have easily gone down that road. And so at each step of my supervision of arts-based research, I'm having to remind myself, okay, take a deep breath, Forinash, just take a deep breath. You can do this. You can be flexible. I can be in the gray. I mean, I'm wearing black and white today on purpose just to demonstrate there is black and white, and then there's also gray. And that it's important to do that. And often what you have to do is do that for the student, because the student is many times completely freaking out and going, I don't know, I'm collecting all this stuff, I don't know what to do with it, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not sure what I'm doing. And so your job as supervisor is to hold that and to know that if you send the student back into the arts to figure it out, that they will. And I think it's easy for me to say that because now I've seen it happen enough times, but the first, I don't know how many times I sent the student back in the art to figure it out, I was holding my breath and hoping that they would figure it out. But now I trust that, and I know that if they have an authentic engagement with the arts, and their question, they will come to some answers. So that's a really important, an important piece to know, and I'll talk more about Tammy in a minute. When to trust the process and when to challenge it. As Sean has written, you have to have the tolerance for ambiguity, for not knowing. You need to be willing to engage in the art making as a process of figuring it out. For me, relinquishing control is critical to realize you're not in control and you don't need to be. I think many times people like me who are orderly types down deep, the minute something seems ambiguous or not clear, I want to make rules and set boundaries. And that's the last thing that you want to do. You want to back away. Back away. You also have to realize that your supervisee's journey is not yours. And you have to let them have their own journey. You have to encourage them to follow their own path. And you have to be right there with them the whole time so that you can help guide them, but don't guide them into doing what you think you would do or what would help you at that moment. So for Tammy, my student, she and I worked very closely together, and I love her dearly. If anybody of you know her, she was a pretty high maintenance student in some ways. She was we talked on Skype because she was in Israel and I was in Boston. We were on Skype about once every other week for a good solid hour, talking about what she was doing, and she wanted and needed a lot of support, which I was happy to give. That's one of the things I love about my job. And she would get stuck and feel like I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not doing anything, and that's when I would say, Tammy, go make art. And she ended up completely changing the way she made art, and she went back to the way she had made art many, many years ago on very large canvases, and really putting her soul into it and her experiences of taking these photographs of people from a variety of backgrounds wearing this coat. And she made this amazing art that's all in the chapter that she and I wrote in Sean's book, Art as Research, which it's great. She has pictures of the code in there. It's really remarkable. But it was this idea of getting her out of being stuck by just going into an art form. All the conversations we had weren't moving her. It really had to be the art that moved her. Oh, right, I left the last one off. Allow yourself to be challenged by the supervisee. This is one of those times you really want to listen to them. And if they have a different idea or something, you have to open yourself up to that challenge, because 9 times out of 10, that's a growth point for you that they're pressing on. And to be open to that is really crucial. But don't let your students get self-absorbed. That's the other thing. Sean, who used to have an office 2 floors up from me, right above me, he'll stop in my office, we'll talk about this all the time, and it's this idea that students can get very internal and it's all about me, and it's all about me looking at me, and you do have to move them out of that. You have to do that, but I think by putting them back in the art, that helps them get outside of themselves a little bit. Evocative and robust results. Sometimes you don't really get concrete results. Sometimes you can't always draw a direct line from the data to the results. Sometimes you have a eureka experience where you're churning on something, the student's churning and they're thinking and they're making music or they're painting or they're doing whatever, and it's not, you feel like nothing's happening, and then suddenly they have a moment of clarity. And it's like, oh, I see it now, I understand, and that often happens with the students that I've supervised. I also want to just share another metaphor that works for me as I think about working with students, and that's the metaphor of diving. Now, I don't dive. I did it once, and that was enough for me to ever consider getting back under the water again. But it's this idea that if you're supervising, you're the boat captain, so you're on the boat, and your student is gone deep, gone under, and you're looking over the boat, and you're looking for the bubbles so that you know the student's still alive down there, exploring, and you're watching that. And then sometimes, the student comes back to the service and says, whatever, and sometimes you have to dive in with the student and get in the water and get messy. And sometimes when the student's way down at the bottom and they've been down there long enough and you know the tank doesn't have that much more air, you start pulling on anything they're attached to bring them back onto the boat. So it's sort of that metaphor of When am I just watching? When am I sharing? And when am I hauling them out and saying, okay, let's stop for a minute. The other thing about evocative and robust results, and I'm going to quote Sean here, or paraphrase him, because I'm of two minds, and there are two different sets of thoughts about do we have a written text with an arts-based piece, or do we not have a written text? Is it important? Is it not important? It's an ongoing conversation. I'm somewhere probably in the middle. I think we need some kind of written document, especially my students now, when they become famous and they're well-known arts-based researchers, and they won't maybe need the text, but right now, for them to be taken seriously, they need the text. So I think that's important, but Sean makes a really good point that, okay, great, so we'll have the text, we'll do that, we'll put this into some kind of an art, or into written word, but also it's time for us to start educating the reviewers and the consumers that they also need to develop their ability to understand art. That it's not just about our need and ability to put everything into words, but we need to start pressing people to understand the arts, to understand music, to understand what happens when you listen to a piece of music. I know Diane's going to talk this afternoon about Grace Street, and I actually performed it with you somewhere. I didn't sing. Australia. And it was really powerful. It was one thing to watch it, it was another thing to participate in it. But the thing that blew me away in performing it was the number of people who came up and said, I never understood AA before. I never understood it. My dad's been in AA for 20 years. I never understood it. Now I get it. Because, you know, I'm sure you will speak to this afternoon, but the number of people who come up and their understanding of this AA, which we've all heard about and all known about for a long time, they get a new level of awareness about it. And why is that? It's not because of the text, it's because of the art. It's because it's in the form of art that they understand it, that it resonates more deeply with them. And I know people often cry when they see this performance, because everybody knows somebody who's an alcoholic. And I think it's very powerful, and people respond to it, and it's only because it's the art. If somebody had got up there and told the story or you know, listed all the themes that she found, that would be one thing, but because it's a moving story with characters who seem very real, it really touches us. So just a couple of closing thoughts. I'm happy to talk and answer questions this afternoon or over lunch or any of that, but I think that the bottom line is that arts-based research is really important to do. It's appropriate, it's creative, it does capture us. It is interesting to me that arts-based research is very much embraced in nursing and other professions, and that we are much slower, music therapy and the arts therapies are much slower to embrace it. And that was spoken about earlier, and yes, I think, you know, the arts therapies have been marginalized, so why in the world would we pick a research method that's even further marginalizing us? But I think that's what we have to do. We have to embrace it. And I think we are coming together, and I've seen more and more research being done, and I find it really, really exciting. So I'm very, very happy about that. We do have to deal with the critique and skepticism, but I have to say, when qualitative research first came on the scene, we got the same thing. I did an early qualitative study in 1989, working with a client who died in hospice, and people were telling me, you know, qualitative research is just not okay. You're not helping us. You need to be doing something else. And I survived that, so I think that we can survive the critique and skepticism that we get when people say, "Oh, really? You're using art to?" Say, "Yes, I am, and here's how I'm doing it." So I think it's just that constant, you know, putting it back out there, not being afraid to put it out there, just continuing to step up and talk about it is what's really important. Yeah, issues are nuanced. It's you have to be back to that idea of tolerating ambiguity. It's really important, and letting go of control. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear later from anybody who's supervised arts-based research if you feel like these make sense to you. This is sort of my emerging theory, or if there are other things that you think about that I haven't thought about, I'd love to have that conversation. So, thank you.